Yeah.
Okay. That'll be easy enough. Okay. Looks like it's rolling.
Welcome, Courtney, and thank you for being with us ahead of I-Astrologer. As you know, this is a program we have put together to help astrologers who would like to enhance their practice, or those who would like to launch their practice, get more support. Many of us have begun the same way, and we struggle quite often financially, being alone on this road and not having the credibility quite often that astrology should receive. So this program is basically both about providing practical skills, helping people with marketing and branding, but also looking at the bigger picture and seeing where astrology is headed. And while these are live sessions, we will have the actual on-location event in Tucson next October. So the reason we were very interested in having you in this session is because you've done extraordinary work and pioneered, basically as an activist, advancing the evidence-based astrology process, helping basically astrology move from a place of, I would say, even amateur analysis to more research-based practice. And so this is, these are the people that will be interested in hearing what we have to say and what you have to share. I see that you have slides, and so it will be great to see, what you have to share, and, I may have questions for you as we go along.
Well, great. I'm so happy to be here. It's great to see you again. Maurice, it's been a while. And I'm really excited to get started. I'm going to just switch over to my screen share here, and we'll jump right in, okay?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. I hope you can see that.
Yeah, I can see it.
Good, good. Okay. Well, I'm Courtney, and I'm the director of Canaveral Research Center, and I produce and coordinate the Kepler Conference. So I think right away, I'm a little bit different. I'm in kind of a different niche, and that's always been the case in my practice throughout my life. And I've been an astrologer, since I was a teenager, all my life, and that's just in this lifetime. We do the Kepler Conference. We're going into our third year now, and as you can see, it's dedicated to evidence-based research astrology. And again, that's a little different. And I hope if you're able, you can join us in January. We're at the beach, which helps a lot. Because that research can get pretty intense, so it's great to be able to be at the beach and let it go like that. But that's what I'm going to be speaking about this evening, is the whole idea of evidence-based astrology, and why it's so important, and why it's so important right now. I'm really glad that Maurice talks about putting it in the context of being a professional in this field, because I think one of the biggest driving motivations behind doing the Kepler Conference and doing the research is the idea of holding astrology to the same high standards as any other profession. I don't know about you, but as I said, I've been an astrologer all of my life, and the fact that we're excluded from science, we're disrespected by science, we're excluded from academia, and even religion hates us. That's pretty special. Okay, it took a lot to get in that position. It's going to take a lot to improve that position. But that exclusion from those main areas, it has a big impact on our ability to function as astrologers, not just financially, although that's a huge part of it. But, you know, even emotionally and psychologically and spiritually, we get a lot of rejection and we get a lot of disrespect. And I don't want to complain about it. A lot of people do. I think it's in our hands, and that we have, you know, all the power that we need to change that image and to improve things if we think about it and we focus on it. And that's what we're all about at the Kepler Conference. So I like to think a lot about the future of astrology and where we're going. And one of our original slogans was, you know, building the future of astrology, because it's one thing to predict it. It's one thing to visualize it. It's quite another thing to go about building the future and setting definite goals. And so I just want to start off by asking some of you to consider, even in your own minds, you know, how do you see the future of astrology? We're in this whole new information age where, you know, everybody's doing big data and AI, and where does astrology fit into all of that? You know, some people think it's going to fall by the wayside, that this whole intuitive, metaphorical, symbolic approach is no longer going to be relevant. But, you know, maybe astrology is just coming into its own. That's the way that I see it. I think we finally got the right tools for the job. But if you go back historically, a lot of the really great astrologers of the past were also the great scientists of their time. And they really didn't separate the two. That's a more recent distinction. And even though we've been branded as a pseudoscience, and that's an insult, you know, that's the insult that the skeptics and, again, the scientific and academic community, and even the media, you know, as we saw recently with the much anticipated Netflix documentary, you know, it's pretty disappointing. But I think, again, we can, you know, we can blame, we can complain, or we can take the bull by the horns and look at how we're really communicating astrology and how we're practicing it, and clean up our own act. That respect is ours to gain. So as we go into this, I want you to kind of think, you know, how do you see astrology in the future? Do you see it increasing in influence? Do you see it waning? You know, what about 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Myself, I'd like to think that anybody that's forecasting or planning for the future should be using astrology. And frankly, everybody forecasts and plans for the future, whether they're doing agriculture or the economy or the government or education. They all have to, but none of them use astrology, which would be a great adjunct to all the traditional methods that they use. That's but one example. So again,
I have a quick question for you on these notes. I mean, it may be a rhetorical question and obvious to us, but let's bring it up and, in a way, be the devil's advocate. Why not continue the way we are? You know, astrology has credibility problems with the scientific community and the academia and so forth. But, you know, astrologers are doing their job, and they have their clients, and they have their conferences. So maybe we can run in parallel and just continue the way we are. Why do you think there is a need, you know, to take the bull by its horns?
I don't like the position that astrology is in. You know, I don't like the position it's in religion. I would really love to have a full-time academic position doing what I'm doing and making that kind of money. I can think of a lot of good reasons, but, you know, the number one reason is that when I say it's not a pseudoscience anymore, I'm not speculating. I'm not talking about the future. You know, there's tons of research that's been done in the last 10 years, statistical, quantitative research, that's working out really well. We finally have the right tools for the job. Okay. And
so what would be our gain as we, you know, bring this forward and show the different light of astrology? What do you think? I mean, you say one thing which is important, and that is we could, as professors and as teachers in the academia, we could be better remunerated and have a more stable career.
Yeah, small things like that. but
which is important.
Well, look at it this way. The waste bothers me a lot. I see people doing things every day that I just go, oh my God, they need an astrologer. and they could really benefit. There's so many ways that we could genuinely contribute to improving the quality of people's lives, of their businesses, of the decisions that they make, but they don't know to use this, and they don't even think that it's a good idea. So the waste bothers me a lot. I like to parallel it with the field of psychology and where psychology was 100 years ago. Okay. Yeah, I'd rather be in the position that psychology's in than where we are now. And I mean, if you don't see that as an advantage, that's fine. But at the bottom line, the research is being done. We have the right tools for the job. Anybody that says that it's a pseudoscience and it won't stand up to the scientific method, they're out of the loop. They're not paying attention, because it's not only been happening for the last 10, 15 years, but it's just getting started. It's greatly accelerating right now. And that's what every other field is based upon, is the standards of evidence and research and reliability. And you know yourself that you're not even going to call a plumber to your house if he can't do what he says he's going to do, if there isn't some standard. And I don't have a problem with astrologers, needing to be able to rise to that level. I'm not really sure why we think we don't have to. That concerns me a little bit. Okay. So moving on, we did a presentation for the Society for Scientific Exploration a couple of years back called Astrology, the Queen of all the pseudosciences. And I really think that we are, because we're the most scientific of all the pseudosciences. And I think we're the first ones they throw the stones at, in a lot of ways. But think about this. How do we know if an astrology technique works or not? How do we make that decision? And you can look at every other field that's out there, whether it's mechanical engineering or building an airplane, or your plumber is a good example, or even the person that's teaching your child in school, or your doctor. They have a very set standard of knowing how it works and whether it works or not. And we all have come to rely upon that. How do we know if an astrology technique works or not? How many charts does it take? And in many respects, we are like the only field that hasn't gotten rigorous in establishing these kind of standards. And that's on us. Nobody's going to do it for us. And then when we talk about the research that's out there, and there's actually a lot, do you know of any? Are you using any? For instance, if I could show you that traditional astrology says thus, such, and the other thing, but there's people that have actually done quantitative statistical research that have demonstrated that actually something else is true. Would you continue just recycling the traditions, or would you switch and use what the research has demonstrated? Okay, and if you have to struggle with the answer for that, I think we're getting to the heart of the problem there, okay? So let's start with Michelle Gokul, who is maybe one of the best known, most famous, and certainly one of the most beleaguered astrology researchers ever. And I have a quote here from an obituary that a fellow wrote for him, who said, "Michelle Gokul was the best friend that modern astrology could have. Sympathetic to our ideas, but never credulous, he unearthed the truth from the layers of guesswork, anecdote, and hand-me-down rules that form the astrological tradition." And I think that's a pretty good definition. There's guesswork, there's anecdote, and there's hand-me-down rules, and there's a tradition. But why the reluctance to test? And many of us have been told over and over again that, well, it's not really applicable, and all the tests have failed, because the scientists and the skeptics will tell you that. None of that is true. The reluctance to test, I think 10, 15 years from now, will be a distant memory, because the tests are being done. And really, astrology performs. Now, looking at Gokulin's work, and I don't know where you guys stand in terms of how familiar you are with his work, but if we ask a basic question like, what are the most sensitive or active parts of the chart? You're going to get the same answer over and over again. It's the angles, meaning the point of rising at the ascendant, the point of culmination at the midheaven, and then also the angular houses by default. And every textbook that you read is going to tell you the same thing over and over again. And they're also going to tell you that the 12th house is bad. You know, it's just like, you know, very problematic and secluded, as this definition does: solitude, institutions, self-sabotage, self-undoing, blah, 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 blah. But look at what Gokul actually found. And this is just a simple diagram of the basic Gokulan sectors. This is for, I believe, the Mars effect. And it's actually showing in the charts of eminent sports people that the distribution of Mars peaked right after rising in the 12th house, and it peaked right after culmination. Not in the angular houses and not conjunct the angles, but actually in what has been come to be called the Gokulan sectors, and in this case, the key sectors. Now, that's a really interesting contradiction. And, you know, we all struggle to get our heads around it. But I think a bigger question here is like, so why don't astrologers use this? How many astrologers do you know that are actually using the Gokulan sectors on a regular basis? In fact, I mean, I've done this presentation several times, and I went and I scanned a whole bunch of current astrology websites, because, you know, everybody says, yeah, the internet has been so good for astrology. It's so popular with the younger people, and that's certainly true, and I think that's good for everybody. But if you go and you read the websites, they just recycle the angular houses and the angles, the angular house. They never even mention the Gokulan sectors. This guy worked so hard for so many decades and did such tremendous work and was so beleaguered by the skeptics that he eventually killed himself when they started claiming that he had used bias in choosing his charts. He couldn't stand it anymore, and he literally killed himself for this work. This guy not only lived for those results, he died for those results, and astrologers don't even use them. And yet they have withstood the test. And don't believe anybody that tells you that they haven't, because Ertel and Irving did the most comprehensive analysis, and they work. And in fact, Maurice here has got some really interesting work in that direction, because he's been able to show even, you know, world leaders very often have their sun in the 12th house. The 12th house it's something we really need to re-examine rather than just recycling this over and over.
That brings us to a very important point, because as you mentioned, on this particular topic, the 12th house, I have examined some of these things and came with very similar conclusion that it has a very prominent place in career development of any sort, not just leadership. And this
eminence is what he called it. Yes.
And so if we want to bring this to, you know, aspiring astrologers, because like you say, many just regurgitate whatever the teacher said or whatever they read, and perhaps, you know, one of the things that is lacking in most of our schools and what is accessible to astrologers is how to do research and basically how to test those methods. Because we, you know, let's take an easier example, Mercury retrograde, right? Everyone is going to advocate about, I mean, most everyone is going to advocate about the dangers of signing contract and starting something new with Mercury retrograde. But like you say, if we actually look at the evidence, most of the most successful corporations were during Mercury retrograde, including Amazon.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and you know, life doesn't stop in the real world. If we're going to be giving advice to people, and really, I want to see us giving a lot more different kinds of advice to a lot of different kinds of people, much more people than we're reaching now. Life doesn't stop when Mercury goes retrograde. People still have to do things. We've got to give them better information than that.
So there are two important points that I really want to emphasize. Is the first thing, the fact that astrology can be used in so many different professions. So it's not only to provide personal counseling, but like you say, it can be used for agriculture or medicine or other fields that can incorporate astrology.
Anywhere people are planning or forecast, or for that matter, anywhere that they're hiring people or trying to build teams, which is everywhere, it's a waste that they're not using astrology. It's a waste that astrologers aren't being employed.
That's what you meant by originally, that it's a waste, that basically it's an available resource for humanity. And because it is misunderstood, let's say that's the main problem, it's misunderstood, then...
Well, let's also say miscommunicated by astrologers too. I think if we take responsibility, then we can change it.
Yes. And at the same time, let's again bring those different elements. I would like to hear from you a little bit more about how, astrologers who are just new to their professional development, I mean, maybe they've studied under respectable mentors, but now that they're on their own, what should they do? And the second thing is, I forgot what the second thing is.
I'm sure it'll come back to you.
Yeah, it will come back.
Yeah.
Let's continue.
Yeah, and those are good points. And look, let's be honest. Not everybody is a researcher. Many are called, few are chosen. It's hard. There's a very sophisticated skill set that goes into it, and it's not for everybody. But everybody can benefit from the research, and everybody can benefit from adopting critical thinking, better analysis, and first and foremost, recognizing their bias. Everybody is biased, and astrologers are biased. And come on, we see faces in clouds. We see sermons, and we hear sermons in stones. And we have to be honest about that and get, I think, a little more separation. And that's where the evidence-based astrology comes into it. Whatever it is that you're been taught, you need to be comparing it against the evidence. And you need to be honest when the evidence doesn't match up to the theory. And unfortunately, everywhere we go in the field, people are cherry picking. They're not working from evidence, and they never show all the times that their favorite technique doesn't work. And we're the only field that does that. I mean, it's... So
what I'm hearing two different things. On the one hand, you say it's not for everybody to do this kind of work. So some people will be leading that kind of effort, and other people will benefit from the work of the researchers in astrology.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you say we should be all testing our techniques. So where is the work for everybody, and where is the work for the researchers?
Well, again, to do an actual research paper and a quantitative statistical research study, that's not for everybody. But everybody can avail themselves of the results, and everybody can adopt a more critical and analytical attitude. For instance, we can divide research into two categories, quantitative and qualitative. And the quantitative is the statistical, mathematical, and it's tough. It's a lot of work. Qualitative is something that everybody can do. And qualitative research methodologies evolved for fields like astrology, where you're dealing with human beings who are messy. And you're really looking more at non-numerical factors, qualities, characteristics, metaphors, symbols, ideas, concepts. There actually are disciplines that have evolved in every other field to study and research those in a systematic way so that you can come to more reliable conclusions. So qualitative is a lot more accessible to almost everybody. And We
Great.
actually are, I want to just back up a second. We're able at this point, using the quantitative methodologies, to demonstrate the reality of planetary influence to the same high standards as they use in every other professional field. But the qualitative is just as important in helping us to really understand how it operates. And if you, this is just a lineup of some of the speakers from the upcoming Kepler conference. There's a lot of people doing really strong quantitative research right now, coming up with statistically significant results that will eventually affect everything that we do in astrology, how it's taught and how it's practiced. And these are just some of them. Guys like, you know, Glenn Mitchell, Mark Urban Lorraine, Will Morris, Jagdish, Bruce Schofield, Vincent. Vincent's a monster. This guy literally programs computers that will pick charts, read charts, interpret charts to a level of statistical significance, showing that it is actually an objective activity. That's really powerful.
So just a few questions from the audience. Omari was asking, is there a particular research design that works better for astrology research? And then he also asked, does the Kepler conference have a scholarly journal?
Okay, those are two big questions. There's a lot of different research methodologies, and it really depends on what you're trying to study, and you know what your subject group is, and they're all applicable in different ways. It really depends on what you're trying to do, and I think that's one of the most creative parts of research is the design. You know, designing that study. For scholarly journal, at this point, we've been doing videos and multimedia video journals. We're going to start publishing print next year. In the meantime, I'm guest editing Correlation, which is the British Astrological Association's long-running journal of research in astrology. I think it's the most important publication in astrology.
And
so that's
how can one access the completed research studies?
Oh, Correlation has all of their back issues going back to the 70s online, archived online, and you can get annual access to that for about $25 from the BAA. And then all of our videos are available in a number of different packages, and we're always putting more of them up on YouTube as well. One of the reasons we've gone with the videos for the first couple of years, a lot of it is, you know, organization. We're just really getting rolling. But again, research is kind of dry and not everybody wants to read it. When we can put people and faces and color and action, it actually, I think, makes it easier to go down, so to speak.
Great. Now, one more thing before we move forward, and that's one thing for me as I'm kind of bridging between the audience and what we want to see in our profession. I think it's very important, if we want to elevate, you know, the practice, and we want to elevate the way we approach, is to also make it accessible. Because one of the problems is, like you say, with qualitative research, people can feel completely overwhelmed. They think it's above their head, and they, you know, just go back to what they are comfortable with. So simple things like terms. You use the word, you know, you use the term big data. What do you refer? What does that mean to, you know, people who are not understanding, who are not familiar with research? And what is cherry picking?
Okay, big data, that's really simple. We have access to lots and lots and lots and lots of data. So, you know, guys like, you know, Glenn Mitchell and Mark Urban Lorraine and Casey Tarvanen and Canaveral Research, we're running studies on data samples of, it could be anywhere from 20,000 individuals to 100,000 individuals to even a couple of million individuals. That's big data. It's a lot of data.
So basically categorizing these individuals into what their profession is, what their birth data is, what their characteristics, what their qualitative.
Yeah, that's big data is quantitative mostly, because when you're doing qualitative, you can work with much smaller data sets. But big data tends to be quantitative. And, you know, just for an example, a few studies would be like, what they call the birth-death phenomenon, people that actually die under solar return. That's huge. And that's been done on samples of up to like 25 million, where they can get the records.
And where do you get this information? Like, if you want to do this research, where is that bank?
Research is very well established in every other field, and there's huge data silos that are accessible to professional researchers, academic researchers. Are they accessible to astrologers? No. For the most part, you've got to know somebody, but like I know some people. And most of these papers are published and available online. You know, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of the birth-death phenomena. Also, people marry people with the same birthday to a statistically significant degree, and we never talk about this in astrology. You're not going to find many synastry books that tell you you should find somebody with the same birthday and marry them, but actually, it's a really controversial subject because that's the result that keeps coming out from the huge data samples, and the scientists hate it. They're really trying to make it go away, and it's not going to go away. So yeah, big data just means we're in the information age. Not only do we have access to these massive amounts of data, but we have the technologies to process them. And we're going to be talking about control groups in just a minute. I'm going to move on, but I wanted to talk about qualitative research. We're going to be doing a lot of training in qualitative research over the next couple of years because we're really going to be working on how people communicate astrology. And we've got a workshop coming up in September, and it's going to be one of a series where we're going to get people in and bring their projects in and workshop it hands-on and, you know, really try to bring the average astrology article up to the same level that would fly in psychology or sociology or any of the, you know, accepted academic disciplines. And there's a very simple process for doing that. We're halfway there.
So that's what will be presenting, the methods, how to actually do it.
Yes, and getting into the whole mindset of what, you know, what's trying to be accomplished there. And we're actually going to workshop, and we're going to be doing these throughout the year. I think it's really important. It's very important.
So the other term that I think everybody should know about, and that I think, you know, most people use and they don't know, the cherry picking. Can you better define cherry picking?
Yeah, cherry picking is, I've got that a little later in the slides, but it's when you, we do it all the time. Just about every astrology class or conference or lecture that you go to, they're cherry picking. They're saying, I'm going to show you this particular technique, and then they show you 3 or 4 charts and show you how it works in 3 or 4 charts, and everybody goes, wow, it really works, and they go home. That's cherry picking because they have not exhaustively looked at a truly random sample of data. They haven't tested the technique at all. They haven't even looked at all the times it didn't work. That's not cherry picking. And we'll look at that just a little bit later in the slides. But it's a problem. You're not going to get to any kind of objective truth if you're cherry picking your data and just taking the good stuff.
Would you say it's the beginning of identifying patterns, the cherry picking? You start to see something repeating, and then once you identify, you know, indeed, that through these chosen example, something, you know, the Mercury in the Gokul sectors is active in such a way, then you need to take it to the next level.
Then you need to test, because we're very biased, and we do confirmation bias all the time. I think one of the best things any astrologer can do is just go into Wikipedia and Google and find all the different kinds of bias that have been established that people do all the time. We deceive ourselves all the time, especially about the things that we already want to believe. And we don't just do it in astrology, but it's a really important exercise because, you know, with a lot of your techniques, there's a really good chance that you're focusing in on the times that they work, but you're filtering out the times that they don't work. And that's what we really want to pursue to get to the real knowledge. So that's just a brief example of what qualitative is. It's very important. We're definitely going in that direction, and it's perfect for communicating astrology. Now, I want to actually look at some real simple research and give you some ideas of how we fool ourselves and how to kind of open our minds about that. And I'm going to start with just some of the history of astrological research, because a lot of people early on made a lot of simple mistakes that we need to be aware of. And I'm not trying to pick on anybody or make fun of them for making mistakes, but one of the first astrological researchers was a French guy named Paul Chouinard. And he was a really accomplished astrologer. But he didn't really understand statistics, and he published a lot of research. He was particularly not looking at the astronomical effects, and this is really important. For instance, he attributed great significance to superior people having more rising signs near Virgo and Libra rather than near Pisces and Aries.
What's superior people?
Well, I guess he was looking at eminence, people who had, had high levels of success. I don't want to try to define that. Okay, yeah, no, but that's what that. But the point is, the reason he saw this preponderance of rising signs near Virgo and Libra had nothing to do with astrology. It was an astronomical distribution. It's simply because in the Northern Hemisphere, we have signs of long ascension and signs of short ascension. And you need to know that coming in. That basically in any sample of data that you've got, you're probably going to have more people with Cancer to Sag rising and less people with Capricorn to Taurus rising. And that has nothing to do with astrology. It's an astronomical distribution. And if you don't know that coming in, you can get really excited about something that you see in a chart that has nothing to do with astrology. And again, we already made these mistakes. We don't need to keep reinventing the wheel.
However, if you see a predominance of the lower rising sign in a certain category, then you do have a point.
That's a really good point. As a matter of fact, Alan Anand just posted this on Facebook today. He was promoting the Kepler conference and he used this, and somebody chimed in the comments and said, in my family everybody's got Aquarius rising. And I thought, that's very interesting, because if you have a data sample and actually most of them have Aquarius or Pisces rising, you really should pursue that, because that's anomalous, and that's worth following up on. But again, we're not picking on Paul Chouinard. He was a pioneer. He did a lot of good work. But again, people have made these mistakes for us. We need to be aware of them. Gokul studied Chouinard. And in looking at these mistakes, I want you to try to imagine 1,000 years in the future when astrologers are looking back at us and laughing at how silly we were. Okay, so I'm not trying to put anybody down. I'm just trying to point out that, again, they're stepping stones. Yes, and believe me, they will be laughing at us in the future, and I hope they enjoy it. Now, Gokul says, and this is from a piece by Geoffrey Dean. He says, despite the disappointments, Gokul acknowledged that Chouinard inspired his application of statistics and applying them to astrology, and Chouinard created these tables of planetary positions that really facilitated Gokulan's work and made it easier for him to move forward more quickly. So even when people do make mistakes, they're still accomplishing something good. Chouinard is the guy that started collecting birth data from the registry offices in Europe, where they get birth times on the birth form. And that's what inspired Gokul as well. So Chouinard did a lot of good as well. Now, I think you've all probably heard of Karl Kraft, who's known as Hitler's astrologer. And that doesn't necessarily mean he was a Nazi, but he did do astrological propaganda for the Nazis, but he was also very interested in research and published quite a bit. Geoffrey Dean and Gokul were both very hard on them, because his biggest problem was he believed he knew the answers in advance of any research. And this is a big problem. And you're all going to do it. We're all going to do it. That's where the bias comes in. And that, sense of really wanting to believe something. And it can really skew.
Well, this is where astrologers can also see that in scientists. They're looking for the reason to discredit astrology. They are biased towards astrology in the first place, and they will prove, they will try to prove their bias wrong.
Everybody's biased. Everybody is biased. But the wise ones try to be aware. And you're absolutely right. We do have an enemy in this. The skeptics are much better organized than we are. They're much better funded than we are. And they're winning, okay?
But they make the same mistakes that we talk about in our own field. They are as guilty as everyone, because if they were coming with an open mind and as much as objectivity towards astrology, they would probably think differently.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and I keep quoting from Geoffrey Dean. He is the #1 skeptic against astrology, and he's done a lot of damage, okay? But again, they're better organized than we are, and they're better funded, and I think we would actually do well to learn from them. There's a lot of things that they're doing right, and that's where they're winning. They dominate Wikipedia. They've kept us out of the academy, so there's huge problems in science. There's huge social problems in science. Yeah. There's huge problems in medical research and publishing. And again, it comes down, to bias. So everybody is biased. Now going back to Croft, again, he had bias, and that was an issue. But here's another problem he had. His genius for error was extraordinary. For example, in a sample of 115 musicians, he attributed great significance to the absence of moon conjunct Uranus in certain signs, even though the slowly moving Uranus could not have been in those signs in the first place. This is a really important idea. Planets are not distributed uniformly, particularly the outer planets. And a lot of people make mistakes with this. Even I've got academic researchers that I work with that have brought me projects in the last year, dealing with Pluto and Capricorn, and I had to point out this is an astronomical effect. Pluto moves so slowly that you can't really derive much from what sign it's in necessarily, all other things being equal. All right, but that's a really common problem. Planets are not distributed uniformly. Okay, now I want to show an example of some research that's out there on the net, and again, I'm not picking on anybody, but this guy was looking at Mars in the charts of public figures, and right away, I'm not happy with that category. Yeah, he's got a big sample. He's got 20,641 public figures in there, but what does public figures mean? I mean, I think at that point you're mixing apples and oranges, and that bothers me. Anyways, he's looking at the Mars distribution in these charts, and this is the graph that he shows. The signs 1 through 12 are arrayed across the bottom, so that's just a typical zodiac. And you've got a definite curve peaking at Leo and Virgo, and then going back down. Okay, now if you look at this, I want you to think, well, what's the problem with these results? Now, this is what this astrologer wrote about it, and he's got this posted all over the internet. He's saying, Mars for fame. Mars in Leo gives strong vitality and stamina. People with this position are natural leaders. They have a strong need. That's why the Mars is high in Leo. Yeah. On and on. And low in Aries. Yeah, well, look, it's low in Aries, and it's low in high. And he's got a whole rationalization for that. It's interesting in that there's a strong assertive placing, but there's always a suggestion of a tendency to burn out and to be constantly changing direction. Oh, the wise astrologer, I'm seeing a sermon in a stone here, because actually all we're really looking at in that graph is the astronomical distribution of Mars. That's all that is. Mars does not have an even distribution, and that's due to its retrograde loops. It spends more time retrograde in certain signs than it does in others. Now, this is from an article that's freely available online by Didier Castille. I strongly recommend you read anything he published. He's got some great articles online. And he just took the French population from the French whatever their national statistics office is called, and he just shows you the distribution of Mars in the French population. And as you can see, it's high in Virgo, not quite as high in Leo there, but you've got it. This is because of the retrograde loop. It's always going to be higher in this part of the zodiac and depressed in these signs. And there's a very simple explanation for that. And yet oh, it's low in Aries. See, they dissipate their energy and they're too impulsive and they argue with people too much. No. This is the kind of thing you've got to be really careful with, and it's really easy to fix with control groups. That's what, and we're going to get to that in just a second. He did the same thing with Venus. Here's his Venus distribution for the public figures. And you can see that Venus is high in Aquarius, and then it's high in Virgo, number 6, and then it's high in 4, which is Cancer. You got a little double peak there in Aries and Taurus, but it's very low in like Libra and Leo. And yeah, so that's the Venus distribution. So again, he's like, oh, Venus in Aquarius, that fits very well with astrological thinking. This placing confers an open-minded friendliness and the capacity to attract people, blah, 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 blah. And it's low in Libra. More than any other, that's the sign of marriage and one-to-one relationships. And Venus here indicates someone who's going to channel all their capacity for attraction toward, oh, come on. He's just looking at the astronomical distribution of Venus. Venus, because of its retrograde cycle, actually forms this 5-pointed star pattern around the zodiac over a period of years. So as Didier, and again, this is Didier Castile, almost 1 person out of 2 was born as Venus was transiting 5 specific arcs representing less than 40% of the zodiac. And look, it's Aquarius, it's Virgo, it's Cancer, it's on that Aries-Taurus border, and there's a little spike over here. And that's exactly what he's showing here. This is not an astrological result. And yet this guy is touting this stuff online. I've talked to him. And he's a nice guy. He means well. I've become friends with him. You know, he's like the Paul Schwarzenegger, but these mistakes have already been made. And this is what I mean. You've got a little bit of knowledge and a lot of bias, and you want to be careful because this is what we call rationalization. He already wants to believe this, and he's got a whole line of reasoning. And, you know, most people listen to him and go, yeah, wow, astrology really works. No. That's not what's going on there. Now, you want to look at some things that have tested out and have worked. This is just a simple graph from a series of experiments that we've done where we compared champion NFL and NBA head coaches with all the NBA and NFL head coaches that never won the championship. And in this case, we used complete data sets. We used all of the guys that had ever coached for either leagues. And we were able to show beyond a shadow of doubt and to tremendous statistical significance that in fact the champions were really high in the earth signs and low in the air signs. This is the tropical zodiac.
In their suns or?
Here we're using Sun, Mars, and Jupiter, and there are good reasons for that, which I don't want to bore you with right now, but we've done it with all of their planets as well. You get the same effect. Alternatively, the non-champions are low in Earth and very high in air. Now, I want to point out that there's actually a tremendous body of research that demonstrates the reality of the elements of the tropical zodiac like this. And I've got an article that I think is going to be out in September in Correlation. They're working on the issue now, but the stuff's done. They just have to, actually put the issue out. And I've done a research literature review of dozens of studies that have been published, and many of them not even by astrologers, that verify the reality of the elements in the tropical zodiac. There's a lot of market research studies out there that were just done on like sun sign or rising sign to establish people's buying habits and shopping trends that again showed relevance, showed the reality of how these elements function. This is where we're at. We're literally compiling literature reviews now and bringing dozens and dozens of studies together that all show the same kind of results. And that's a really important step forward.
So, Courtney, as we approach the end of our session, I want to give you some more time to complete, but I want to bring, and that's the point I had forgotten when I said that I had two questions.
Oh, you remembered it.
Yeah. So, we refer to the tropical zodiac, and so I have two more questions. Number one, there are some seemingly unscientific, I would say, applications in the tropical zodiac. And how do we reconcile with that? For example, we all know that the constellations are not the same size as the signs. I'm not talking even about the placement, because that can be better, we can better rationalize or understand why, we can start the zodiac with the spring equinox and 0 Aries. But the fact that there are such things as, Mercury is not really retrograde in the sky, and the constellations are not 30 degrees, and that is something that will never be scientific, because you look out and you measure, and it's not going to work. The second question that derives from that is astrology really needing, we know it all needs to improve, but do we really need to meet today's scientific standards? Maybe science also needs to evolve in order to better understand astrology.
Well, one of the things that we put a tremendous amount of work into is what we call East and West bridging, the Vedic astrology and Western astrology. And there's a tremendous amount of history there. I don't think there's anything particularly unscientific about using the tropical zodiac or the constellational sidereal zodiac. We've worked with a lot of Vedic and Indian astrologers over the years. And what we've actually found is, well, for one thing, a lot of times it doesn't even matter which zodiac you use. If you pick one consistent starting place, you can get results. We've actually done that. But we've got a big project going on now, what we call East Meets West, where we literally get like the top Vedic astrologers in the world and put them with top Western astrologers, and we give them a chart, like it's a quiz, where they have to answer the question. We have them systematically go through their different techniques. You guys should join us in this. We'll be doing a lot more of these online. It's incredibly exciting. And one of the things you find out is, there's certain things that tropical is better at. There's certain things that Vedic is better at. And
but both Vedic and tropical divide the signs in 30 equal signs. So they both do the same thing, which is not constellational.
Yeah, but people automatically think that means they're not compatible, that it has to be either or, and that's not true. And we've shown that. And in fact, what we've done tremendous correlation studies. My buddy Rahul is really keen on this. And if you actually use the two of them together, you get more accurate results. Mm-hmm. So, for years now, people have thought of this as some kind of a problem, the two zodiac problem. Mm-hmm. It's an opportunity. It's not a problem. And from the research point of view, it's a huge opportunity. And right now, research is not a war. It's a very cooperative venture, at least for us at Canaveral Research. As I said, we've been blessed to so many great Vedic astrologers. It's really exciting. It's not a war, but right now, I would have to say the Western astrologers are winning because they've got more research out there. But, we're working with a lot of Vedic people to catch up on that end. But we're doing a nakshatra project right now. We've got a consortium working on that with the lunar nakshatra zodiac, which is really interesting. That's not even...
No, that's a wonderful thing because, like you say, if you choose a system, then you apply the scientific research methods, and that's, you derive results from that, and you can measure those results. And my question is, it's beyond the Vedic or tropical. It's the fact that some astrological components, some astrological foundations are not necessarily astronomical. And that's in both systems. We can basically bring up a lot of arguments around that. Not everything in astrology is necessarily astronomical. So my question is, sometimes astrology is about symbolism. You know, retrograde motion is not happening in real, you know, really in the sky, and yet we bring a lot of symbolism to that because it's our subjective experience. So
But
how?
that's true of psychology as well. That's true of sociology as well. But they have derived disciplines that combine mixed methodologies, combinations of quantitative and qualitative to firmly establish the reality of the phenomena that they're trying to observe and measure. And it works in astrology too. And I think what you want to be careful with here is the split, the either or, the divisive reductionism. You know, oh, it's science versus spirituality, and that's nonsense. They're not opposed to each other. In our day and time, it seems like they are, but you know what? If you go back and look at the greatest innovators in science, whether it's Ptolemy or Newton,
Agreed.
they're extremely religious, spiritual people. They don't have a split. Kepler, you know, is a religious. They're like religious fanatics going at science. They're the same thing. It's an approach to understanding. It's an approach to truth. And you know, we're in a culture where people just love to reduce things down to very simple propositions, and then it's either or, and we just screw at each other across the great divide, and it's not necessary.
Isn't that what science is doing? Kind of trying to box everything into its own biases?
Some of them do and some of them don't. There are scientific materialists that do.
Are we selling ourselves short by trying to meet those standards and somehow reduce astrology even?
We are selling ourselves short when we say that we can't meet scientific standards. We can and we should. It will help us in every possible way. Do we have to sacrifice our spirituality and no, it's not an either or proposition. But the way we've been doing it has kept us marginalized and excluded and disrespected. We don't have to lose, you know, the soft side of it and sacrifice that and throw it away to gain the scientific side. And I want to encourage everybody to stop the divide. It's all one. They all work together. And the most effective path is the mixed methodologies, the qualitative combined with the quantitative. Everybody else is doing it and it works for them. Again, look at the trajectory of psychology. They were where we were at back in the day, not that long ago, 100 years ago. They were like hoodoo. Great. Okay? But look at the path that they took. And even though it's highly symbolic and spiritual and interior, it's quantifiable. They can measure it. They can do amazing predictive processes with the measurements in psychology.
These are great points. I think that people need to internalize and be encouraged, not feel defeated. And I would like to first, before we come to a close, if you can give a list of resources for people to continue their research. So we have the Kepler conference coming up in January. That's going to be what are the exact dates?
Hang on. There it is, January 24th through the 27th. We have
in Florida.
In Florida, we're at the beach on Florida's beautiful Space Coast in Cocoa Beach. You can fly into Orlando. We do online research forums all year round. So you can always join us online. We have a pretty vigorous educational program, and we try to cover a lot of different bases. You know, research and education and research is a challenge. We think it's incredibly important. But, you know, we're always trying to find that right balance, keep the researchers happy, keep the newcomers happy. And we've learned a lot in that process. So we're online all year round. You can join us for the East Meets West forums. Those are going to be so exciting.
Is that a subscription, or is that signing up for the conference and people can attend those live sessions?
I'm glad you asked that. We're getting ready to go on a subscription basis starting in September. We're going to be rolling it out. We've tried a couple of different combinations over the 3 years we've been in business, and now we're going to subscription. So yeah, you can get in on in a number of different levels. And as I said, starting next year, we're going to start doing a regular annual research journal as well.
And outside Kepler Conference, you spoke about Constellation magazine, which is related to the British
Correlation.
Correlation.
Yeah. I strongly recommend it, and I'm guest editing right now. So it's and their online archives are invaluable. They really are. Well, I think the research movement is picking up around the field. We started this back in 2015, and research is not going to sell itself. Okay, we've worked really hard, and the momentum is really picking up, and also the results are really picking up. So there's more and more publications all the time, and you're on the internet. That's your greatest research. Use Google. Whatever you want to learn about, whatever you want to know about, put it in Google, and you'll be amazed at what you can find out there. People are publishing all the time.
And what about the big data? People can use Astro Data Bank. Do you feel that that's a good pool to begin with research?
Well, I think it's the best we've got right now, and you can search and using it. There's a number of different software combinations that are out there. None of them are perfect. We need to take a big step forward there, and that is being negotiated. But Sirius has got a lot of data, and it's got research features. It's not the easiest program to learn. There's Jigsaw. There's the Gators program. So that's stage one. If you ask me that question in about 7 years, I think we'll have a very different conversation, because the astrological big data AI platform hasn't been built yet, but we're working on it.
Wonderful. And one last question, and I'll let you also complete if you have any additional thing you want to share. But how can OPA better advance this theme as well? How can we better incorporate these themes in for our members?
That's a really good question. And right away I look at the qualitative research methods, which I think are accessible to everybody, and look at the kind of presentations that you're doing. Are you just cherry picking? Are they just recycling traditions without scrutinizing all the times it doesn't work? Even simple things like that, where you just take a more critical, analytical attitude, can help a lot. But let's look at doing some qualitative research work with them. Even for people that are just trying to put an article together for Tim at the Mountain Astrologer, or Ronnie at Del Horoscope. And Ronnie's very supportive of evidence-based astrology. She's looking for good articles like this. Use the qualitative research methods. Learn some basic ones, and it just automatically raises the credibility and the integrity of your work. And you don't have to be a rocket science to do it. Okay, it's accessible. It really is. So that's something you might just want to look at even in the short term. A more critical, analytical attitude, and start incorporating more of the qualitative methods.
Yeah, and that can also encourage our viewer here and our whole membership. So thank you so much. And is there anything you feel you'd like to share about this whole approach, about whether it's about the specific research, whether it's about, you say, where we're headed, what's the future of astrology? Anything that you feel we didn't cover that you'd like to add?
Well, just in summing it up, a couple of things. Like I said, let's lose the split. It's not either or. It doesn't have to be a war within ourselves or a war out there. And, the people that really understand science also understand that. There's plenty of people, hardcore scientists, and I met some this week, who are operating at the top levels of NASA, and they're profoundly spiritual and religious people. Maybe they don't quite make as much noise all the time as the materialists, but let's look for that that common ground. Come and visit us online at canaveralresearchcenter.com, the keplerconference.com. That all goes to the same site. And I hope that you can join us at the beach in January. We'd love to see you there. But again, I've been an astrologer my whole life, since I was a teenager. And, you know, I wasn't exactly born yesterday. I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time to be an astrologer. We're actually doing things that are going to propel the field forward in so many exciting ways and spread out all the different ways that we can use it, we can apply it, and that again, we can genuinely improve the quality of people's lives. That's really exciting.
Thank you. Thank you for being part of I-Astrologer. Thank you for speaking to our audience here, and very motivated astrologers who, like you say, see the tremendous value and the service that we must put to use. So we hope this exchange will inspire them to be better astrologers, because the better we get, this is also an opportunity to be better remunerated, to stabilize and to enhance the flow of our profession, to have better schools, to have better publications, to have better organizations. So we shouldn't be shy to talk about money. You know, money is an important part of our growth, and creating abundance in our field is, like you say, we shouldn't have a divide between learning and being properly remunerated for, like you say, the tremendous work that we're putting out there.
Well, and if we're genuinely creating value in people's lives, then we will be remunerated. And maybe that's something, you know, we need to maybe look more carefully at. Like, what is the actual value that we're creating for people in the way that we're practicing astrology and the service that we're actually bringing to them? Because when you genuinely create value for people, you do tend to get paid.
Thank you. And we hope that this program will bring more interest in that, as we will bring this up also during the actual event when we meet in Tucson. We will speak about the different aspects of the profession, whether it's beginning with marketing, branding, photo shoots, and then speak about the use of software. You speak about some software that can be very practical and very useful for research, but not always easy to use. But then encourage them to join the Kepler conference and to educate themselves in this direction. So thank you so much, Courtney, and I'm sure we'll be in touch and do more work together.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and good luck with the conference this fall.
Take good care. So I'll let you stop the recording.
Okay, I'm gonna get out of the screen share.